Hello and welcome. You are watching QTV and you are watching The Week in Review. I'm your host Ari Darami, and as ever with me to discuss some of the stories I have Mr. Momodu Mboj. Mr. Mboj, as ever, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Adi.
And for those who are regular viewers, you'll have to bear with us. For the irregular or new viewers, this is how it goes. 10 stories from the week, and we kick them around, we discuss them in some detail. And some stories get given more time than others, but we try and get through all 10 of them. So we talk about the oil spill at Mandinari, we talk about Day of the African Child, the number of ambassadors who have presented letters of credence, about a donation from the Egyptian embassy, lots more. So stay with us. So let's get kicking, shall we? First of all, there's been a recent oil spill at Mandinari. We went there to find out what exactly had happened. Here's what we found. Have a look.
It has affected us so much because we can't get oysters the way we used to before, because the oil is on the oyster shells. Even now, when you chew the oyster, you can taste the oil in it. Now we are afraid to sell oysters. From today, we are going to suspend our business because of this problem. The oil stain on that cloth, it is exactly the same as on the oyster shells.
There is an ongoing ecological assessment of the extent of the damage caused by the oil spill, spearheaded by the National Environment Agency.
And there you heard our colleague Mohamed Lamin Choi speaking to us about the oil spill there. And as I said, we didn't just want to talk about the oil spill, but the impact that it was having on people. Mr. Mboj, we saw it quite a dreadful one, and we deliberately didn't just concentrate on the ecological impact. We wanted to talk about the impact on people's livelihoods.
Absolutely, and it seems as if sometimes we tend to forget that one and just focus on the physical, as it were, impact. And from what we've seen around the world, such oil spills, we all know the effects on the ecology and the like. And here, this is it. This is a part of the mangroves, where they get the oysters, oyster vendors, the women who sell them. That's it. Can you imagine what impact that will have on their lives?
And it was quite serious. And you know, our colleague Choi, he discussed it with me. He said, look, can we do this about more than just the oil spill and the ecological effect? And I said, well, of course, you know, see what you find when you get there, because we've been taken there by the various authorities who are going there. They've gone on a cleaning exercise. And so, as you say, and the impact has been such that some of the oyster women told us they were having to shut down their business because when they harvested the oysters from the mangroves, you found traces of the oil in it, and they said this is not fit for human consumption.
That's it. I mean, one of them, one of the sellers interviewed, said actually when you taste it, you can taste the oil.
Sure.
So this is it. But really, Adi, wherever you have, I think, in most many instances, really, wherever you have some kind of ecological disaster of some sort, somehow you'll have people affected.
Well,
that chain, at some point, you'll have people affected. I know that according to government, they've given $1.7 million towards the cleanup and all the rest
which
of
some
it.
people thought was a lot, by the way, but I didn't. I mean,
yes.
Whatever it takes, it should take,
That's it, because in one of the many reports that I have read, there was 3 million being bandied about.
That's
you know, somebody asking, was it operational costs? So this is it. So my first question was, how was that number arrived at?
Yes.
Was it that they did the studies and know exactly how much was needed? I knew that there was a task force, I think, established. Was it this task force who said actually the cleanup and the people? I hope they haven't forgotten the people. They'll need some help within there. So that's it. So this is what you need. Or is it that this is what we can contribute, and the rest, see how you can get it elsewhere? I'm not sure what's going on there.
And it's interesting. I mean, when you mention about that it always affects people, the interesting thing is, most of the other news media that covered it, all they concentrated on was the fact that this had stained and had clung to the mangrove swamps and the roots of the mangrove trees. And when I read it, I thought it was curious, because they're not just the ecological thing. These people, that is their livelihood. As some of them said, I've been here for 20 years doing this. This is all the work I do. And so I found it curious that all of them just kind of because the most dramatic thing that you can see with the eye is, of course, the oil clinging to the mangroves. But then, of course, you scratch the surface, you look behind. Okay, who else and how else is this affecting people in its impact? Because sometimes, I mean, if people didn't harvest oysters, then no big deal. You know, the cleaning would be the story. But when you consider the impact it was having on people's lives, then of course that really should have been the story. So I was a bit surprised.
Oh, absolutely. And remember, at journalism school, we are told every story, follow it all the way to people.
This is
every story, got a line, goes all the way to people.
And the reason they teach you that at journalism school is because that way, that's the way you connect. Because your audience can see themselves in that. They can think, okay, maybe not an oil disaster, but if something else happened that affected my work, my livelihood, how would I be able to cope? And so you follow it to people, you know, what is the effect on people?
Absolutely. And I think that once we've done that, the physical impact, the social impact and all of that, there should be issues of accountability.
Of course.
How did it happen? Whose responsibility was it to do what?
Which we're told is some of the things that the task force are actually looking at. I think they've already identified how it happened, but then they want to know about consequences, really.
Absolutely, and when you hear the details of what happened, they started the operations around 2:30 p.m.
That's right. Yes.
Went until 3:30 in the morning, something like that, and it wasn't discovered until 7 a.m. Were there any safety checks in place? How does it run? How do these things work? Maybe you need to go into it if we really want to prevent something like this happening again.
I mean, somebody who spoke to us off the record said that because they've done this quite a lot, it's almost automatic. You hook up the pipes that come from the ship with the heavy fuel, and you kind of forget about it because it's so routine that people almost get bored and get complacent about checking, even though they might have a book which says, did you check this, did you check that, did you check that? And so, of course, because of that complacency, they forgot to check every single thing, every step of the way. And so it happened, but as I said, they didn't want to go on record, but they were off record. But it seems that this is what had happened.
This is the wonderful thing about process and procedure.
Sure. There's a reason why they're there.
That's the reason why it's there, to minimize. We can never be perfect. Everybody knows that. But the minimization of accidents, risks, and that sort of thing, this is why we have them. So it's good to go into what actually happened. To learn the right lessons and make the right adjustments, the structural adjustments, isn't it? I mean,
so I think we're all waiting. We're eagerly awaiting the results of this investigative task force. Thank you for that, Mr. Mboj. And now on to our second story. We, this week, across Africa, people commemorated the Day of the African Child. This time, there was a particular theme to it. Have a look, have a listen.
Education and cultural reorientation should be targeted at the gatekeepers of our society. Educating our children will give them some form of impetus to resist these socio-cultural malaises meant to impede her from reaching her full potentials.
There we heard the theme, of course, was about stopping harmful practices. Particularly those harmful practices that affect children. Of course, Day of the African Child. Mr. Mboj, you and I spoke about this, but shall we go back to the history of it? 1976, Soweto. That's where it all started, and that's what we're commemorating and remembering.
Absolutely. School children, protesting against
poor standard of education, being forced to learn Afrikaans,
that sort of thing.
Sure.
And close to 200, it depends, between 170 maybe to 200.
That's correct.
I mean, died. It was shocking. It was extraordinary. It showed you really the extent to which apartheid would go.
Sure.
But that was a turning point as well.
It really was. And I can tell you, I was in England at the time. I was still at college. And I can tell you, when the news came through, and it was then being reported on at those days in England, you had ITV and just the BBC. People actually didn't believe it. In fact, even the people in the studios of those things, you could see the kind of incredulity on their faces, that they knew that this was a brutal, nasty regime, but they didn't realize or believe that they could kill close to 200 school children. And there was real shock. And for us as young students at college, we were horrified. We were already militant. And honestly, we wanted to go and burn down the South African embassy. But we were stopped, obviously. But it really was a shocking incident. And that incident is what we're kind of commemorating every year on the anniversary of this event.
And it was a pivotal point in internationalizing it, because the boycotts of South African goods.
Yeah.
So that was really the beginning, and other boycotts. So internationally, everybody really rallied. They were horrified, the horror. They were galvanized by this horror. Sure. And that's it. So every year, in fact, our current vice president, actually, Badr Ali Juf, I remember back in high school.
Right.
So every year we used to mark that Soweto uprising. So I remember a particular year in the mid-80s, around 88, he gave a speech at St. Augustine's High School, the hall. It was quite extraordinary, fantastic, very enjoyed it. So he is the vice president now. That's it, and it was to mark this particular event. So
and in many African countries, it's actually a public holiday. And I'd mentioned this when we were discussing it on drive time. In Cape Verde, it's a public holiday, and they announced to parents, like, either spend the day with your children talking about the day and its significance, or go to some of the events around children. So I've been lucky to be there on 2, maybe 3 occasions when it has fallen during this time, and it's extraordinary. I mean, they march through the streets, and then they give a performance of song and poetry. And it's all to do with the day and the kind of remembrance of those people. But, Cape Verde is a country where the governments have been quite militant about us not forgetting our history and the kind of the violence of the colonizers. So, in a way, I'm not surprised. But I was surprised when I came here and I found it wasn't a public holiday.
At all. And perhaps we should be doing something else. Because once we marked it, last night I was just thinking, because there you could see the people of Soweto, there was a political purpose.
Yes.
So I'm asking today, for our youth, like Gambia, for instance, I wonder if I were to talk to some of these youth and tell them, do you have a political purpose as such? So you're wondering, because I think events like this or commemorations like this should lead us to ask these questions. What's the political purpose of youth today? If there is such a thing, or are there many purposes? I do not know. We all talk about development, we use these bromides and using all these terms. But we need to delve deeper and come with specific ideas, original ideas, not simply babbling these abstract nouns, and you can never derive any actionable program from them.
Talk about progress, talk about development. What does it mean?
What does it mean?
What does it mean?
So what's the political purpose? What's going on here? Can we make, I don't know, ending corruption my political purpose? I don't know.
Is that why they chose a theme this year about ending harmful practices? So it wasn't just about commemoration of the day. There was a specific theme. And in the Gambia, what they chose to highlight were FGM and also early child marriages, because it's still a scourge. And so maybe in that sense, there's a purpose rather than just an empty, if one can use the word empty commemoration. There was a purpose behind the commemoration.
Oh, absolutely. You do get these socio-economic, ad hoc purposes and all about. But that one, there was a general, because we are told that, often we don't mention Stephen Biko, but really we should, because the idea, as it were, behind really the events, that black consciousness.
Sure.
So they were having all sorts of black organized programs,
within
self-reliance. So the political purpose, that's the larger picture that will determine what you're going to do. This is what I mean by that. And yes, here we are told that when it comes to FGM, I've got a few statistics here. More than half of girls aged 0 to 14 years have undergone some form of FGM.
Sure.
That sort of thing. And then 1 in 4 married before their 18th birthday.
Well, this is it. And that particular one is a story that we're going to come to in our 4th story. This kind of early marriage and particularly child marriage, which still goes on.
But perhaps what I can take away from this with positive note, you know what I mean, without sounding complacent. But one has to be realistic about these things. According to Gordon Jonathan Lewis, they've also realized that FGM among girls aged 0 to 14 years, we've just got the statistic there, but again, it's been dropping.
Right.
Over the period. 56% in 2010, 51% in 2018. You know what I mean? And even early child marriage, what? 47% in 2010, now 34.
Okay, well, let's get it down to 0. But yeah,
exactly.
that's encouraging sign.
That is encouraging sign. That is accelerated. Because you don't want all doom and gloom.
You don't.
You want a realistic picture of what is going on. So there's been this trajectory going down. So understand and know that we can do something about it because we've demonstrated it. This is my point.
Great. Thank you for that. Thank you. And now on to our third story. His Excellency the President has been really, really busy this week. Busy doing what, you're asking? Busy meeting ambassadors, presenting letters of credence. Here are a few.
In a formal ceremony, 5 ambassadors arrived at the State House to present their letters of credence to President Adama Barrow. The ambassadors are from Guinea-Bissau, Mexico, Hungary, Israel, and Rwanda. The presentation of their letters of credence officially marks the beginning of their ambassadorship in the Gambia. For us to present is the ambassador of Guinea-Bissau, Louis Domingo Camara de Barros. Guinea-Bissau-Gambia relations date back nearly 50 years. Gambia is accredited in Guinea-Bissau, where she is represented by an ambassador.
I believe in the few months ago, our two people, you will see some change in our bilateral cooperation. Since yesterday, we start to work with the Superior Direction and Minister of Foreign Affairs to take place the 4th Joint Commission in our two countries.
Now, there you heard presenting letters of credence. We heard the chap there from Guinea-Bissau. And man from Guinea-Bissau, I think he's one of 10 who presented letters of credence to the President, His Excellency the President, this week, Mr. Mboj. And all of them said warm words about, you know, cooperation and so on. I chose that one just randomly because obviously there are, I think, 10 to choose from. But a lot of them actually came with promise of development. Hungary, amongst others, were amongst the ones that presented. And so, does this go beyond just the nice words that they say at these presentations where they present their credence and they meet the press? Do practical things come out of these?
Well, I'm
things?
sure some practical things come out of it. And then you realize that with all of them, even Hungary, one would have thought, but still we have diplomatic relations since 1971.
Yeah, that's right.
You believe? It's been earlier than Bissau. I think Bissau is 74. But
that's right.
that sort of
that's
thing.
correct.
Yes, you know, sort of to have these international friendships, this fraternity, this is Gambia's strength.
Sure.
Remember, this
Indeed.
was
Yes,
passed out of the Keraba Jawara style,
That's
really,
right.
because you don't have much resources, you're so small. What else can you do? Really?
Sure.
But they try to have a framework, as well, diplomatic friendships all over the place. And the potential is there for a lot of things to happen.
That's right.
This
I mean, for a lot of them, they're promising all sorts of developmental stuff. I was interested, the chap we just heard there from Guinea-Bissau was saying that obviously a lot of Gambians living in Bissau, and you know, quite a few Bissau Guineans living here in the Gambia. And so he said they've actually formed some sort of, forgotten what the term was, a kind of committee to actually look into doing practical things actually to link the two countries. So I was quite encouraged by that. It wasn't just the kind of usual, oh, we're going to cooperate, we're going to have bilateral, this, that, and the other. He actually mentioned actual things that they were going to start doing.
Absolutely. And we're talking about how we want that intra-Africa trade. That's the whole thing about the African free continental.
Yeah.
It can happen at every level, bilaterally.
Indeed.
You find more ways of doing trade together and doing things together naturally. So one hopes that perhaps with the introduction with this African free continental trade, perhaps that would reorient thinking, relationships, So that could be interesting.
That's an interesting one. I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, thank you for that. Thank Mr. Mboch. Now on to our fourth story. Now, when we were discussing the second story, Day of the African Child, I kind of stopped my colleague there and I said, we will come back to this one later. What was I talking about? Well, it is about a Zero Fistula campaign. What's that? Have a look, have a listen.
Fistula is a health condition which women and girls suffer from as a result of obstetric labor. The obstetric labor can be as a result of early pregnancy, early marriage, because the girl is too young and is not physically fit to bear a child or go through childbirth without the timely intervention of a health professional.
Ndai Roshar, the UNDP country representative, said the UNDP is on a quest to eliminate obstetric fistula by 2030, as it is entirely preventable.
We are on a quest to eliminate obstetric fistula in the Gambia by 2030.
On the way to eliminating it, Mr. Mboch, we heard there. But, and you mentioned figures there, I mean, and again in the speech there we heard talk of early marriage and early, childhood bearing when the child's body is not ready for it. Encouraging signs, as you mentioned in this statistic, but really, as you mentioned it in the other story, I said, we need to get down to zero. And we talked there in the piece we've just heard about eliminating it altogether. Do you see it happening? What's the cultural shift that needs to happen for this to be a reality?
Absolutely, because for me the first thing I thought was, well, do we have the right data? Because you've already said we don't even know how many people have them. They said according to some situational analysis, they said between 335 and 1,052 women live with the fistula, obstetric fistula. Sure. But they admitted that maybe you may have even more walking around with it and you don't even know, given the stigma attached to some of these diseases, anything to do with the genital organs and stuff like that. Yes. There's always some stigma there, so people are reluctant.
That's right. And this campaign now is being heavily pushed by the First Lady. And so very much, and the clip we saw there was from URR, and she's actually taking the message around the country. She's going to different places and she's actually heading it. We didn't hear from her there, but she did speak at that meeting, and she's tried to reach out to people and say, look, some of our traditional practices are harmful and they can have long-term effects on the women who are affected. So a good thing, surely.
Oh, absolutely, and we must keep on talking. And I do wish that it's the way they do it sometimes, I feel. Well, you will call a meeting, everybody will come, the presentations, and I don't know how they do. But in our societies, for instance, I know that, for instance, the aunt is very crucial. That's somebody that girls
you have a
relationship with. So we need to use the way we are, really, how things are structured, who's got authority where. Sure. How do we tap into this? That's the only way that can really make a difference in many ways. I don't think we use these local channels.
That's right, and that's a crucial point, because in Sierra Leone, when they were trying to sort of deal with the whole FGM thing, they thought, okay, we've tried this. Okay, what about the men? There are certain men from certain tribes who say, I will only marry a woman if she has been cut. And so they started to appeal to the men, saying, look, yes, you might be lucky to marry somebody who's been cut, but every year 20 or 30 young girls go to the bush to be cut and die. Is it really worth it? So they started this thing called I Am My Sister's Keeper, where men then joined the thing. So it wasn't just you're talking to so men. I was one of those who went out and started lecturing men, because I went to school in Bo, which was an area where there were men who I went to school with who had said things like, I will only marry a woman who's cut. So like appealing to them and say to your children, when you grow up, think differently. And I gave examples of people. And so, as you said, the aunt can have that relationship with the young girl. Yeah.
They all have their social functions.
Indeed.
So you use these categories somehow. They probably do, but from what I see, you just have lots of word advocacy groups.
That's right. And as you said, the meeting happens. Lots of people turn up at the meeting. and they kind of pat themselves on the back for the fact that they attended the meeting.
That's it.
But when you leave the meeting, are you going to do anything practical? That is what needs to happen.
The effectiveness.
Sure.
Yeah, so there's an improvement, but there's a lot more that we can do to quicken, as it were. Talk to the right channels.
Yeah.
Socially, we are structured in given ways.
Yeah.
Each has got his or her authority. It's got a role to play within the larger whole.
Sure.
I think certain changes might come from aunts and uncles.
And
that sort of thing.
you've kind of put your kind of finger on it, because in the West, when they teach you stuff about Africa, they always make the point that in many African countries and society, the family actually matters more than the country or the village or the town or the city.
Absolutely.
And that's true. You know, the whole familial setup where you can go to family members and they can have an influence is crucial to us in a way that it isn't in many kind of non-African societies. So that is a great point, actually, that you made.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you really want to have any impact socially, then you need to know how the society is structured, and you know what channels to use. That sort of thing. I think it helps. Well, we all know that it helps.
We know that it helps. So we hope they're listening to Mr. Mboj there, and we hope things can be done on a practical sense, because really we need to get to that zero that we're trying to get through. Thank you for that, Mr. Mboj. Now on to our fifth story, which takes us to kind of the halfway stage. The Egyptian embassy have become one of the recent ones to donate, I beg your pardon, to the OIC. Have a look.
Very pleased to know that the summit will be held here, and we are doing our utmost to help in the success and achievement of this important summit. Our gift today is some IT equipment, and this is one step in all the accompanying steps that we are doing with our sister country in order to achieve the success of this big event and important event.
There we heard the Egyptian ambassador. And it was interesting, Mr. Mboj, because with great understatement, she said that this was, in another bit of that, she said it was a small gesture. But the journalists who were there, they were quite impressed with the range of stuff that was given. And of course, in the official who received it on behalf of the OIC also made the point that actually this is not a small gesture. And in fact, somebody from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But Mr. Mboj, all of this is part of, you mentioned about ambassadors, and I was mentioning kind of their usefulness and so on. This is an example of it.
Absolutely.
They want us to have a successful hosting of the OIC, and bam, they come forward with some fantastic IT equipment.
Absolutely, they have their uses.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, and from what I understand, listening to the officials of the OIC at the Secretariat, they said, you know, this is much needed.
Yes.
You know, it was a constraint, because with me, I think that with these donations and gifts, maybe it's important to ask them, what are you most in
what
need
do you
of?
want?
What do you want?
Yeah, quite.
And then maybe that's really what, maybe they did that, I do not know, but I think it's important that when you're donating, maybe ask them what they need, really, what they require.
And again, you know, with NGOs, when we used to kind of, somebody would say, I've formed an NGO, I'm going to go to Sierra Leone, I'm going to do this, and that. And, you know, myself and others who were in an organization called Sierra Leone Diaspora Network, we would call them and say, so you're going to go to this community in that part of Sierra Leone, and say, yeah. Have you asked them whether that's what they want? And it's no different. You know, the OIC event is coming. It's going to be hosted eventually in the Gambia. And, of course, they have certain constraints, and they have certain resource constraints. Yes, people are giving them things, but go and speak to them and say, what would you like? And I suspect that is because the Egyptians wouldn't have just come, here's some IT. You don't know if they need it, but it must have been that they've said, look, we've spoken to you guys, this is what, and they say, how can we help? And they say, this is how you can help.
So absolutely, we've got all of that. So now we're just looking forward to the event itself.
Yes, we're on tenterhooks. When it comes, it'll come, and it'll be brilliant. Thank you, Mr. Mboj. But to the donors out there, if you do want to donate anything to the OIC Secretariat or the wider, ask them what they want, and then see if you can satisfy that need. Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. Thank you. And join us after the break. And when we come back, we have our 6th and 7th and so on stories. Join us after this break.
I am the light goddess. Everything I touch turns into light. I am the light at the end of the tunnel, and my technology is the answer. I am the happiness in your life. I keep you connected, and I am Q-Power. I am Qcell. I am Senior Boss. We innovate, others follow. Call 111 for more information.
And now, one of my favorite things, when I heard that people had won elections to the National Assembly, one of the first things I asked was, is there a system for inducting them? Mm-hmm. And the reason I asked this was because I'd seen some of the prospective MPs or National Assembly members, and I have to be blunt about this, I was not impressed. They didn't seem to have the smallest grasp of what it took to be a National Assembly member. They said, when I get in, I'm going to do this, this and that, things that they couldn't possibly do. However, somebody has heard, and apparently this is something that has happened all the time. There has been induction, including a most recent one. Have a look.
The other key thing about this, these seminars is that we're going to give you an insight into how to effectively run committees to scrutinise the work of the government, which is really, really important work to do. And much more will become clear. And there's going to be a simulated, I think Victoria said earlier, a simulated committee session a little bit later in the week, tomorrow.
And there we heard Craig Whitaker, a Member of Parliament in the UK Parliament, Mr. Mboj. And I was interested in this because, as I said in the lead up to the story, I'd been quite disappointed with the kind of grasp or lack of it that some of the prospective National Assembly members had on proceedings. And you would imagine if they wanted to get in, they would have been watching it. There are many times when we broadcast stuff and other channels have broadcast goings on. But there we had somebody from UK, and so quite interesting to bring somebody, even though it's a different system, at least it's got kind of teaching people about parliamentary procedure.
Oh, absolutely, and this is what the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association in the UK and the Westminster Foundation for Democracy. I remember as well in 2017, with that new parliament, there was an induction for them as well. Okay. And of course, I mean, in our situation, I mean, let's be honest, in most other perhaps parliaments, we tend to get more experience, as it were, isn't it? Really, people tend to run and the like. But for us, given our transition, the way this is, our politics is going post-Jammeh, I think we'll maybe suffer this sort of thing for a while. Sure. But this is it. They need to learn. There's so much to learn, and this is just an intro.
Indeed,
it's an on-the-job learning. You learn on-the-job experience. So this is an intro, and then hopefully they will go on to improve themselves because they have a huge task.
Well, that's right. Because one of the reasons why it's important is because some of them will be asked to sit on committees that have a kind of oversight function. And you and I remember not so many months ago when some of these committees were bringing people and asking them tough questions. Now, if you don't know that this is, what you do and how you do it, how can you be on that committee? So something like this is very, very important for them to get to know.
Absolutely, and the lawmaking as well. The legislation, because whatever you enact can influence society for God knows how long.
Indeed. Indeed.
So, but would it be in a sort of like positive, productive way, or in a disabling, in an enabling way, or in a disabling way? Constitutions, it depends.
Indeed,
so it depends on the laws. The laws are very important, and how do we hold government to account? Obviously, which is absolute key here. And then something else. How do I solve my constituents' problems? They have to go to that as well.
I was going to come to that because, if I'm the person who I've voted for you, you are my National Assembly member, I'll be saying, oh yes, it's great that you're attending all these committees, but what about locally? What are you doing for us?
Absolutely.
So all of that they have to learn about, what they can and cannot do for their constituents, as well as how they can get involved in legislature and legislating and also on committees, etc. All of that has to be learned.
That's
and
it.
you learn on the job.
That's it. So one hopes that the induction would involve not only what they need to do in the National Assembly and outside of it.
Indeed.
What you need to do at the constituency level.
Sure.
Because you're going to have to sort of promote the economy of your constituency. How do you do that?
Of course.
How do you get connected? What is it that you can do?
Sure.
That sort of thing. Then having your surgery.
Well, I was going to come to the surgery idea.
You're going to have a surgery.
Just quick, like when you have the surgery and your constituents come and tell you these are our concerns. Can you raise them in Parliament, because it might mean that a bill has to be put before the Parliament to change this or whatever, to become an act, and then all of that has to happen. And so, as you rightly said, are they teaching them that stuff as well? We certainly hope so.
Absolutely. And having a surgery, Ade, it helps you to keep your finger on the pulse.
Indeed.
You know exactly what people are thinking and that sort of
Indeed.
thing. You
On
can
the local
perhaps
level.
even strategize better at the
Sure.
very, very local level.
Sure.
So it would allow you to adapt whatever system you have in
Indeed.
place. That's it, to cater for the needs of the people.
Yeah, so thumbs up to the induction for the National Assembly members. Long may it continue. Thank you for that, Mr. Mboja. That takes us on to our seventh story. Medical students have now been given their white coats. What does that mean? Have a look.
The white coat ceremony is the presentation of a white coat to medical students, marking a transition from the biomedical sciences to the clinical areas, as it will mark their first contact with patients. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the white coat ceremony was suspended for the past 3 years. Ramatullah Njai, Provost of the School of Medicine and Allied Health Sciences, explains.
Hard work, honesty, integrity, and to comport ourselves with dignity. And this is part of what we expect of doctors to be, who will be our colleagues in the future.
This is what we expect of doctors to be, Mr. Mboja. There we heard. This was the 19th cohort to pass through from the biomedical sciences to the clinical area. So now you get your white coat, you can go out there and do stuff. And of course, we need doctors, don't we?
Absolutely, and the rite of passage.
Sure. The ceremony and so on. So because of COVID, there's been none of it for 3 years, but now it is back. Yeah.
So this sort of symbolization, if you like, it's a transformation.
Sure.
So it's symbolic. It is supposed to transform from preclinical. Really, it's preclinical to clinical. Really, it's that sort of thing. Sure. And apparently, it's not been around really for that long. It's just since 1993 that the white coat ceremony was sort of
but now it's become
introduced.
a tradition.
Absolutely. So for me, the first question I ask myself, why white? I was curious about it. Then they tell you, well, any other color, when it's dirty, you wouldn't see. But with white, you see the dirt immediately. It stands out. So it encourages cleanliness. But there was another purpose of kind of what they call, white being the symbol for purity. The same old trope. So they say that you can have this purity of purpose.
Yes.
Being in this health profession.
As you say, there's a lot of symbolism.
It's a lot of symbolism.
Wrapped up in it.
That's it. So we want them also to reflect on this.
Yes, and the words we heard there from the provost is that, this is, there's an expectation from the public about integrity and everything else that we expect from a doctor.
And especially in our society, it's very curious, isn't it? I mean, for almost all educated people. It's as if the rest of society, those who have not had that education, they expect something from you. It's just that sense. Is it a colonial heritage? I didn't know. But educated people around, people expect something from you.
They do.
But somehow we tend to betray all the time. It's almost like we formed a class. One sociologist one dared to suggest that in Africa there are only two classes, the educated and the uneducated. And they take over government, take over all these jobs, and then loot the nation.
So med students, we hope you don't fall into that bracket. Thank you for that, Mr. Humboch.
Yes.
Thank you. And now on to something which is slightly linked. Because of COVID, mortality rates had gone up, down, and so on. In most countries, here in the Gambia, of course, road traffic accidents accounted for more deaths than did COVID. But nonetheless, there have been recent data published about a 5-year span of mortality here in the Gambia. Have a look.
Generally, rate of mortality in the Gambia has declined through the pandemic by 10.3 per 100,000 population. Though a slight excess mortality was observed during the second wave of the pandemic.
In terms of our regional variations, Director Sane gave these statistics.
Western Region 1 has greatly experienced a reduction in mortality during the pandemic, with a very minimal excess deaths in the second wave, which is about 4.8 per 100,000. For Lower River Region, equally noted similar trend during the both waves of the pandemic.
Mr. Humboch, it was a 5-year span, but because the 5-year span included the pandemic, of course, there was a lot more concentration on the pandemic. And touch wood, whatever, the Gambia was not as adversely impacted as many countries in Africa, probably South Africa the worst. And so these were encouraging signs. But I must ask the question, sorry, a difficult one. Encouraging signs of what? Why do we think that there was not that impact that was expected?
Yes. Well, they said according to their study, some areas.
That's right.
You see, for some reason, maybe we need to go into the variations.
Sure. Yes, yes.
Some areas like West Coast.
Sure.
You know, a lot of deaths
yes.
from COVID, the pandemic. But go to what was it here? Central and North Bank.
Yeah.
There wasn't much. Really.
That's right.
So this is it.
There were regional variations.
Regional variations.
Sure.
It will be interesting to know why. But then I just forgot about this 5-year one. I looked at generally mortality relative to other countries in Africa and the rest of it. According to WHO in 2020, we had what they call 7.6 per thousand.
Yes, that's right.
Yes, that's that sort of thing.
Yes.
But they've seen it's true. It's been declining.
It's been declining.
Everything has been declining.
That's
when you look at the world, what's the world average? 7.7.
This is it. And so when you heard them talk about the level of excess deaths was not as high as had been predicted or has been feared in the Gambia. So, you know, they factored in COVID and they said, okay, because some were not reported, possibly, but so they thought, okay, so if we look at the figures over the years, has there been this huge, but as you said, there were regional variations, so it wasn't as if, you know, this was something that affected
at all. And I understand that when you look at the average in Africa, it's 8.2.
Yeah,
we're actually
so below it.
below average. So this is it. But even South Africa, yes, they had huge numbers. But Africa generally, really compared to other regions,
that's right,
the numbers were relatively low compared to other.
That's right, and people are still scratching their heads as to why that is. But
yes, probably it will take time.
Sure.
For the right people to do all the right studies.
I know, because what I've seen so far has been guesswork. Really.
Absolutely, this sort of thing will take time before we know really how many died.
Sure.
So
we wait and see, and then we'll see the next lot of data. Thank you for that, Mr. Humboch. Takes us on to our penultimate story, and it's about the 20th anniversary of the beginning and the end of the Rwanda genocide. Some of it was quite horrific. We've tried to spare some of the details and kept them out of this particular report, but have a look.
Family calls for her father to take refuge from the war. He would not quit from his revolutionary fight and was killed. At the age of 14, Angelique and her siblings were left with her mother. Angelique's mother could not stand the trauma following the killing of her husband. After several attempts to survive with her children, Angelique's mother succumbed to the perpetrators of genocide.
With all things, one that broke me down is the death that my mother died because they raped her before they killed her. They put a spear through her. It couldn't go out of the brain, so it came out of the chest.
Now, I'm sorry for that excerpt, and it was horrific enough. Well, Mr. Mboj, what we heard from Rwanda, people were shocked. I can recall I had Rwandan, sometimes called themselves Rwandese, friends in London. And so I would attend the diaspora meetings, and then I would watch some of the documentaries that would play. And there was one that always stayed with me. I think it was on CNN. And the chap was talking, and they said, "Why did you go out and kill?" And his story was kind of typical of what he said. The first person I was involved in killing was the guy who was married to my sister. He said, and worse than that, I was the one who introduced him to my sister. So he was my brother-in-law. He said, but when they told us go out and kill these people, he was the first Tutsi that I knew, and I said, let's go and get him, and we killed him. And that was the kind of madness that seemed to infect the country for 100 days, close to 1 million, if depending on the statistics you see. Truly shocking.
Completely inscrutable.
Yeah.
You just don't understand why. No wonder some people say that actually civilization is just a thin crust, scratch, and then you get the animal there. It's extraordinary.
I mean,
in many ways.
You know, unbelievable and barely comprehensible. I mean, just the sheer brutality that you could identify, and that one of the reasons why I wanted us to kind of focus on the stories, that sometimes I tell my journalists here in the office, oh, stop going on about, you know, hate speech. We don't have hate speech. But in a way that's good, because one of the reasons why they report on it is that they don't want it to get to the stage where hate speech becomes acceptable, becomes the norm, and leads to something like this.
Absolutely. How politics can use certain differences in society. I mean, for it, and then awful, horrendous things emerge from it. For me, the abiding image was when, was it the Belgians? There was troops. There were troops there. Remember, was it Belgians?
Belgian
I can't remember.
troops, yes.
When they were leaving,
they were French and Belgian
the
troops.
People they left behind. There was this image of this tall, good-looking woman. You could see horror in her eyes.
Right.
And there was a young boy. You could see absolute terror.
Yeah, sure.
But then these people left, and the reporter said afterwards, all of those people were killed. So that was extraordinary. So this was a thing that everybody knew was about to happen.
Yeah, sure.
Romeo Dallaire, the Canadian general who had the peacekeeping force, who was heading the peacekeeping force in Rwanda at the time, sent all sorts of, let me just quote for you, they were going to conduct an outright slaughter and elimination of the opposition.
Sure.
Sent everything.
Yes.
The UN wouldn't budge. It was extraordinary.
This is it. And again, when I discussed this with Rwandan friends who were upset about it, they said that part of the reason there was this inaction is because what was being proposed was beyond anybody's comprehension. They were saying it could not happen. People are exaggerating. But as you said, us human beings, you scratch beneath this skin, we can do the most terrible things to each other. And yet they didn't believe that this was possible. It seemed unbelievable.
Kofi Annan was the head of what was in the UN. He wasn't the Secretary General
at
then,
the time,
but he was head of one unit. And then they were supposed to take the decisions, but he said he didn't have the support of the Security Council. At one point, he tried to get 82 people to supply troops. He got zilch. That were his own words. Yeah, he got zilch. So it's extraordinary when you look at the world. Nobody, America could do it, EU, all of them, but nobody was willing to risk anything. And Dallaire said, all I needed was just 5,000. We could have done a lot.
Yeah, sure.
They wouldn't do anything.
They took, of course, troops led by Kagame to kind of come in, intervene, overturn the situation, and eject the sitting government, and of course restore sanity.
We are getting examples all the time, our experiences. If we do not start doing things for ourselves, are they never going to happen?
Nobody's going to do it.
Nobody's going to come. These people, they're just like, I don't know, sometimes, I don't know, it's just difficult to say, but yeah, it's just the same old. Sure.
Africans, we have to do stuff for ourselves. Thank you for that, Mr. Mboj. And that takes us to our very, very last story. Now this one, you might have a smile on your face. It's about Nigeria Democracy Day. Have a look.
On Monday, the people of Nigeria marked its 2022 Nigeria Democracy Day, observed annually on June the 12th. Democracy Day anniversary is a public holiday in Nigeria and is an occasion to celebrate what Nigerians call the freedom and unity of our nation. President Buhari joined Nigerians, including former President Goodluck Jonathan, at the Eagle Square in Abuja, where a parade was held by the armed and security personnel. Since 1999, Nigeria has celebrated Democracy Day to mark the end of military rule and the return of power and control into the hands of those freely elected by the people. On this day, Nigerians recommit themselves to ensuring they protect and preserve the ideals of democracy. In 2018, the federal government moved Democracy Day from 29th of May to the 12th of June. This change was to remind all Nigerians of one free election, after which the presumed winner along with Nigerians were denied their rights and their choice. In what is his last Democracy Day televised address as President of Nigeria, Muhammadu Buhari reminded his countrymen and women to never forget the sacrifices of the heroes of Nigeria's democracy during 1993. He described their patriotism and peaceful struggle as something that should guide Nigerians' actions, especially when it comes to electing their leaders and holding them accountable now and in future.
Mr. Mboj, this is the last Democracy Day before the next election in Nigeria, and that's why it matters. And of course, Nigeria is at one of the most difficult points in its history, with all sorts of instability across the country. But Democracy Day, there's a reason for it.
Fantastic. June 12th. You all remember Abiola.
MKO Abiola, Chief Abiola.
Absolutely. Won. And then, wasn't it Maradona?
Maradona, exactly. Came in and overthrew him. And
overthrew him.
And so they're commemorating that. And of course, as they said rightly, they changed the date to reflect that, to give it some sense of purpose, and for people to reflect on the fact that this was the last time the military intervened and overthrew, and we don't want to go back there again in Nigeria. As I said, we don't have much time on this particular story, but interesting times ahead, because of course now all the parties, APC and all the others, are now fighting, and we even hear Goodluck Jonathan might be one of the ones who might put his hat, literally, in his case, back in the ring.
Absolutely. Tinubu and his Atiku Abubakar, who had actually contested five times before and lost, and there's somebody called Peter Obi, and then also something. Absolutely. So that was his last, really, address, and then hopefully we'll have a peaceful one and let the best person win.
Absolutely. So my Nigerian people, as you know, I am Adeyemi Olusegun Abiose. So my Abiyokuta people, vote and vote wisely. Mr. Mboj, thank you for your interventions so far. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure.
As always. And to our viewers, it's always a pleasure having you here. Until the next time, it's goodbye.